So thank you very much, Carrie-Anne, for introducing me and for welcoming me, and it is a pleasure to be here. I was, during this week, I've just come from a conference in Sydney, and they reminded me, it's 5 years since I arrived in Australia, and it feels like home. It always takes about 4 years, I find, but it is beginning to feel like home, which is good. And for a public speaker, not so good, because in Ireland we speak quickly. And in Ireland, I'm known to speak quickly. So the more at home I get and the more enthusiastic I get, the quicker I go, okay? So I can't see you brilliantly, but if somebody stands up and waves and goes, I will see you, and I give you permission to ask it to get me to slow down if I do speak too quickly, it's important the message gets across. Which enthusiasm can help, but clear vocalization also does. So when you'll have read the description of this keynote, and there were two things that when we were talking about it and preparing it and with the leaders of this conference that we identified as perhaps helpful. One, the role of questioning as a sign of the times and a space for the Spirit to speak, and an essential aspect of our theology of faith, and especially, I would say, those of us who minister to young people, to our leaders of the future, from whence will they come and how will we help them emerge? So questioning, and then beauty, the arts and music in human life and Christian faith, and their importance in and for the lives and leaderships of those we lead. And it is true that this is my area of research, but I'm not presenting it here as much because it's my area of research as because my wanting to transmit faith and help form leaders for the future led me to this space. So I hope you find it helpful, because I hope some of the questions that you have are the ones that I was seeking to answer when I landed in this space of theological thought. So in trying to lead theology and young people from past to present to future, which is why I thought, I need to, there. Before I dive into those second and third, I wanted to just begin talking about that challenge of young people and how what we are doing is precisely that, bridging from past to present to future. I wasn't here yesterday, but I heard very good things about your whole day. My colleague Emmanuel is a biblical scholar. I'm what they call a systematic theologian, which means if he draws and helps us interpret scripture for present and for future, obviously. I try and draw as well a little bit on how the truths that we've understood in scripture and that the Christian community has dived into have developed, and how we can access them now for the present. So that'll be the attempt that I do. And as I was preparing this keynote, I did go a little bit to your own sources. And your mission statements, may I compliment you, are really clear. They're very beautifully expressed in the attempt of what you're trying to do. And I was drawn to this, the basic mission statement: Catholic schools were founded to proclaim Jesus' message of God's love for all. That message that emerged 2,000 years ago, more or less. And our Catholic faith calls us to embrace contemporary world with a Catholic imagination and a particular hope-filled view of the human person and all creation. So past, in the present, towards the future. That's always what we're doing in Christian terms, isn't it? We can't let go of the past, because from there emerged our faith. We are historical. We live in a present that we need to learn to look at through the eyes of faith, and we look to the future and we want to envision, and we need to preempt, and there's the challenge, especially for educators. How? We need to make sense of their world and their lives. We need to make sense of our world and our lives with a perspective of faith within a Christian community, which gives us a particular lens. It gives us glasses, it gives us eyes to see. And the challenge is to do that for them and for ourselves, and both together. We are in this world with them. We're not separate for them. And they help us in that task, which I think was part of what you were talking about yesterday. I also liked how you describe religious education and your own role therein, and as a critical part of the whole, and an essential part of the whole, deliberately attending to the spiritual reality and to the well-being of the students that are in your hands. And at the same time, with a disciplined process of faith-seeking understanding, where the questions, and I underline questions, of God, beliefs and life are articulated and explored in dialogue with the Catholic tradition to develop our students' faith lives, and we interpret with them. And as you do that as educators, and as I do that as a theologian and a speaker and a missionary, we are theologizing. That's what we're up to. Faith-seeking understanding is the most time-honoured and perhaps even unquestioned, it's been complimented a little bit, but perhaps unquestioned understanding of what's happening when we do theology. And I do understand that often theology can sound a bit distant. I was invited, because of various initiatives of the faculty, to dialogue with Rachel Cole from The Spirit of Things. And one of her first questions was, theology sounds very kind of out and up there for us who muddle through our lives. And I said, muddle's a good word. We all muddle a bit, but it's in the muddling and in the questioning and in the seeking that we are already seeking an understanding of our faith. That's theology. It's not outside my muddles. It's not outside my questions. It's from my questions into more faith and into more truth and into a way of understanding truth that can be helpful for me and for others that come after me and who are interested to me. So and this is really the premise, but I think it's helpful, or at least for me it was helpful as I started, so I hope it is for you, to think about what we're doing and to try and situate what we're doing. Faith-seeking understanding, of course, was St. Anselm's understanding and definition of theology. I work a lot with a theologian called Lonergan, Canadian theologian, and he reinterpreted how we're doing theology simply because he realized that in the present time, as we seek to interpret, and one of the words that comes up a lot in the statements that I've been reading was making sense, helping them make meaning, helping them interpret, so how we make sense of things. So this is an adaptation of how he describes theology. He says, Christian theology bridges between a culture and religion within that context. That's what it does. We're bridges. We stand in the gap between culture and church. And we stand in both, but we stand in that gap. So I'd like to bring those two together. In doing Christian theology, we are seeking an understanding of the faith that we have as we seek to bridge. And if I could put that visually, I'd put it like that. And the reason visual helps me, and I'm a musician more than as you can see, this is not artistic. I'm not an artist. I saw there was a workshop on art, and I'm very happy about it. But the friend who did the painting is an artist. I will say that. But we're in the gap, and we're in that gap in an overlap because we're in the church and we're in culture. It's not like we're sitting in the church and trying to pitch out to culture. We inhabit that space as well, right? And as we try to make sense of things, we're trying to make sense for those who come behind us. So it is us. It is us that do that. And another way of doing it, and this is because I felt drawn back, and this was actually something I was working on because the conference I came from last week was with clergy of the Archdiocese of Sydney. And one of the documents they draw from, and this is really important for us in Catholic schools and with a Catholic understanding of theology. When we do theology, we go to Scripture. Our theology always has two directions. We go to Scripture, we go to the past, we go to tradition, we go to those who've helped us understand, but we also go to the human world and reality. We go to human experience. We go to faith as lived and experienced in all our vulnerability, in all our historicity. So we always need to keep those two together. And the thing is, that in this, we're the link. We're the link. It's us thinking and questioning and believing and even doubting, and that's where I want to move towards. It's us. It's the insights that we have. It's the aha that we have that will help others move forward. Now, often, instead of aha, what was that? We're questioning. And one of the things I would like to say today is that that's not something to be afraid of. I'm sure you will have heard this joke, but for me it kind of epitomizes all that was beautiful and challenging about my Catholic education many years ago. And I got a good Catholic education from the Loretto sisters, but I remember someone telling this joke. They were in a classroom, and I'm still working on what numbers are which here, but one little teacher was in a classroom and she goes, "So what's small and brown and furry?" And they were small kids. Silence. What's small and brown and furry? Silence. Until finally in the back row, this little kid lifts up his hand and she goes, yes, James, what's small, brown? And he goes, I know the answer should be Jesus, but it sounds like a squirrel to me. You know? And I know none of you, but we've sometimes been there, right? I know I should be saying X, Y, or Z, but actually what it really feels like to me, and actually what I really think and what I really feel, and the problem comes when I feel that there isn't a space for that, right? When there isn't a space for their questions, because there isn't really a space for mine. So we're in that space, and we're in that space of questioning, and we're in that space of trying to find out. And the main thing that I wanted to start with, which was why questioning is the first point, is let's hold that space. We are seekers. We are questioners. That's not a problem. And we need to be, because the culture and the changing culture that we're inhabiting and that we're called to help guide them through. And by help guide, I don't mean, and I'll come to that, we have all the answers and they, no, that's not the way it works. We know that that's not the way it works, but we also know that we have to lead in that quest. So we do need to both embrace the questions and somehow seek the answers and somehow seek with them answers to the questions. And the problem is that in the culture that we live in now, if we all live, if you like, behind, in front of this culture, and I know you were talking about scripture yesterday, so there's the context, the text, and in front of the text, and we're all here in front of the in front of the text that we inhabit now is moving really fast. It's moving really fast. On my table last night, we were talking about shifts in culture, and we had different paradigms of shifts in culture, okay? One of the ways that helps me to understand it, and this is really to do with theology, and again, it's taken from Lonergan. He talks about stages of meaning in Western culture, and I am aware that our students are no longer only Western, and all of us in this room are no longer Western only in culture. However, the faith that we are trying to bring from the past into the present and mediate has come to us in terms of Western theoretical concepts very often. So we need at least to understand in order to be able to shift somehow and bridge into the future. He describes 3 big stages of meaning in Western culture. In this way, common sense. So culture was born before we started theorizing, before we started thinking about whys and whats, and that's with Greek philosophy. Common sense. So life as you practically move in, and it's not that these realms pass, because thankfully we all have the common sense to find the coffee in the morning and to know that we need to. So common sense stays. It's not we leave one and go to the next. But in understanding faith, it does shift. So common sense, then theory, and theory is that whole big time of Western culture that spanned practically all of modernity and some of postmodernity. It's the what's this, it's the theoretical terms that enabled us to come up with, and God is Trinity, and God is love, and Christ is human, and it's beautiful and essential, and I don't want to knock it. Okay, I'm not going to knock it. But it's only one aspect of our faith. And what Lonergan says, and what we're experiencing with pre-modernity, modernity, post-modernity, is that shift is going really quickly. And that sometimes the words and the concepts and the beliefs that we hold as dear are difficult to translate into the future because they live in another kind of way of making sense. So interiority, he says, is the one that we're in now, and it's a different way of making sense of things. Something kind of similar would be when Ranner says, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will be nothing. Will either experience something or will not know how to believe, because only reasons don't do it, and in a sense that's perfectly consistent with how Vatican II introduces Dei Verbum revelation. God is someone with whom we can dialogue, someone who comes to our encounter. So it's not new, it's simply how we understand it and how we grasp it. And that is the quest. Now the problem is often, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but the problem that I experience, and I am aware that I am less a teacher than a kind of a faith minister, formator, that has then moved into theology, but I did work for many years before I taught theology with young people, mainly in chaplaincy and universities and retreats, teaching them how to pray and trying to enable them to also speak about their faith. And it seems to me that things are shifting. It seems to me that things are shifting. The way that I describe it is, and have described it, especially before I went back to do the license and the doctorate you were talking about, Kerry-Ann, I felt like more and more, especially when I was talking to young people, I was speaking a language that they couldn't understand. And they were speaking a language that I didn't understand, and I was saying the same things. Or maybe not in the same way, but I was basically saying the same, but that culture was shifting, and you do feel that it's shifting. These are two of the people I studied with when I was in Rome, but I like these two. The first one, Salman, is a Benedictine monk, and he just says we have to recognize that the carpet is being pulled out from under our feet culturally. Culturally. The young people who are our children and our nieces and our nephews and our students understand things differently. And one of the ways they understand things is that they don't really understand things. There's a confusion around, and that's what Query is trying to say. Deciphering is harder for them. Reason and affectivity get mixed up more. Naming things, and that doesn't mean, and I'm not saying that because there are beautiful values in our young people and they're more sensitive to justice than I ever was, they're more sensitive to friendship and to fairness and to margins sometimes. They have a beautiful sense of there's lots of things that they have, but there's also things they struggle with. And I'd just like to suggest one thing that really helped me understand this, okay, in case it's a key for you as well. And it has to do with words. And I know that you're very aware that words aren't all that we use, but it's this thinker here, George Steiner. Steiner is a Franco-American thinker, and he tries to reflect on culture, and he wrote a lot on language and translation. And he said, and I know that's a bit theoretical, but I'll translate it. He's basically saying, there's a lot of shifts in culture around faith, okay? So there's the secular society rising, lack of religious belief, there's technological advancement, there's the crisis of institutions and the church and the distrust and the Royal Commission and sexual abuse and all of those things. He says, but underlying it, there's something else, and it's more profound, and it's the way we relate to words. He says, words don't say reality in the same way that they did. He calls it the time of the epilogue, logos, word, after the word. He calls it, we're in the time of after the word. Doesn't mean we can throw them out, but it does mean they don't say in the same way as they used to. And that's the way we relate, and that's about the shift. And it's big culture, it's big vision shift, pre-modern modernity, postmodern shift. I heard an example once, and I don't think I've met many in the room, just a few, but it is an example that really helps me, and until I find a better one, I'm going to use this one, so if you've heard it before. It was, I read it in a book called Truth is Stranger Than It Used to Be, which is a great title. Truth is truth, but it's stranger than it used to be. And he describes this historical shift as follows. He says, 3 umpires, baseball umpires, are having a chat after a baseball match in a pub. No, they were Irish. No, they weren't. And as I didn't know and had to find out, so just in case there's any like me in the room, and I know you're Australian, all things sport are your court, but just in case, I found out that a strike, it's always the umpire that calls the strike. Because in cricket you can kind of see, but in baseball you can't, it goes too quick. It's got to be within a region, so it's only the umpire that calls a strike. So anyway, the 3 umpires are in the pub and they're talking, and the pre-modern one says, there are balls and there are strikes, and I call them as they are. To which the modern one says, no, there are balls and there are strikes, and I call them as I see them. To which the postmodern one says, you're both wrong. There are balls and there are strikes, and they ain't nothing till I call them. Isn't this where we are? I mean, in all beauty, I'm a bit modern, okay? I'm a bit modern. So when someone came to me and said, Jesus is real, the church, with all its faults, is a space where Jesus inhabits, the Eucharist, my reaction was, I don't know if that's true or not, okay? But I need to find out. So if it's true, I need to find out. It was a before and an after. I can't move forward till I know if this is right or not, because I either leave it or take it, modern. Now you say to someone who Jesus is for you and how important it is, and you've got all the reasons and all the answers, and what do they say to you? Well, isn't that nice for you? How do you argue with that? Do you know, it's not even, oh, I don't believe that. Isn't that nice for you? Different worlds. And they're not, well, my experience, yes, sometimes there's hostile, but sometimes it's not hostile. It's simply, I can't get it. I can't get it. So this is the world that we are called to teach and to minister to. And I say it so that we embrace it. I don't say it in negativity. I say it in joy and hope. God doesn't, like the world hasn't fallen out of God's hands. The Spirit is still present in our people. But we need to name things and move with it and seek ways together with them of interpreting this space. And I do think that there are sensibilities and sensitivities that they have that we need to learn to read, and you know them more than I don't even need to stay in this space, but they do have, and we need to see where they fit and where is the Spirit. And sometimes it will be the Spirit that's calling us to awaken to something that we didn't sense was so important, and suddenly they're saying it is, and it's the Spirit saying to us, grow up, or grow in, or grow further and develop your faith in a different way. And we need to find those keys and find the narratives that help them make sense of life. And I just thought I will work a little bit with music, probably more little bits of my own music as I move forward. But this is not mine, obviously. I'm going to let you watch a video. It's an English group called The Streets, and the song is called Never Went to Church. I don't know if you've listened to it, but I love it simply because I think it invites us. It's one of many, and we could talk about music, we could talk about films, we could talk about, there are many spaces where our young people make sense of things and interpret their lives in ways that we need to learn to listen to. So I just thought we'd open a space to reflect and see what you think of this.
We never went to church, just filled with
good, isn't it? And I don't know what stays with you and explore as you will, but and we'll unpack it perhaps in the masterclasses. But I know what touches me is the searching heart, the searching heart, the honesty of a searching heart, and the depth of thought. If there isn't an entry point there to understanding God as love, I don't know where we'll find one. And if there isn't an entry point there to understand that we're made in the image and likeness of a God, and the footstep is within us, I don't know where else we'll find one. You know, there are keys in the beauty and the intelligent and even the complex and befuddled ways in which we make sense of life and suffering and joy, and there's everything there. So the invitation to listen to culture and listen to what people are thinking about their lives, even when it's all muddled up and they hedge their bets. That's okay. God can handle that. God is not scared of our searching. God is not small-minded in dealing with our questions. So, questioning as a sign of the times and an essential aspect of our faith. How am I doing for time? Is someone going to time keep me? Can you tell me when we're 10 minutes out from the end? Would you do that, just so that thank you. Still a few things to say, but I'm just aware you can lose sense of time when you're up here. So questioning. And you and your mission statement leave room precisely for that. The religious dimension acknowledges the sacred. It keeps the big questions of God and the whys of life and living always to the forefront. That's part of your job description. To guide students to navigate through these deep questions. And I do think, and again we're back to the squirrel, right? There's different ways we can do this, and it is unhelpful if we think that we're the ones that have the answers. Bring all your questions. Who has all the answers except the one who is the answer? But we can walk with them, and we can help them to not be afraid of it because we're not afraid. Because we're not afraid. Navigating faith between certainty and certitude. I love those two words, and one of the thinkers of our tradition that explored it more was John Henry Newman. Certainty is when I'm certain about something. Certitude is when I'm certain, when I'm firm, when I'm convinced. And I can have certitude even if I'm not certain. There is a difference. I can have certitude in God and trust in God even when things are tough. And that's the beauty of depth of faith. My mother is a Monaghan woman with deep faith and absolutely no theology, except what she gets in the pews, and she's got that deep wisdom. I still remember the time she was, one of my cousins came out as gay, having 2 kids, and her brother died, and she just felt she had to face truth. So they separated, and she's still friends with her husband, but she felt she had to own this. So my elderly mother, well, not so elderly then, but 60, 65 mother, Monaghan born, was on a golf course with Ellen when Ellen told her that she was gay and that. And what did my beautiful, believing mother do? On a golf course in Ireland, she gave her a hug and she said, everything will be okay. Any answers? And I mean, we're talking 20 years ago in Ireland, or 15 anyway. Any answers? Maybe not, but everything will be okay. Certitude. Certitude. Truth is stranger than it used to be, but that doesn't mean that there isn't truth. And we need to hold the questions that people bring to us, even before we have the answers. I remember just after I became a missionary, and a missionary supposedly is that you want to evangelize, and therefore you're going to bring the truth. I was at a wedding, one of my in-laws came up and he said, so you're a missionary. Does that mean that you think that you have something that I don't have and I could do with? And it was a problem. And all I could do at that stage, pre-theology, was to say, sort of. Because I do. And I still stand in the yes, I do, even if I don't always have the answers. Yes, God is good news. Christ is great. Something hit me and I would love you to have it. Which doesn't mean I'm any better, that we're any better, probably the other way around. But still, I want you to have it. We need to hold that space. Which another friend understood very well, Alejandro. I was evangelizing working in Spain for a few years with student doctors, and we had an ethics group for believers and non-believers. And one of them was this lovely pre-doctor called Alejandro, Alex. And he was an atheist, and he was the most beautiful presence in that group, because they were lovely, Christians and non-Christians alike, but he was a real, and attentive to, like, he was a real ethical, beautiful presence, wanted to be a doctor who listened, who was informative, who gave time to his patients, but he didn't believe. We became great friends. And we're about 5 months into this dynamic, and I'm there, and I was praying, I think, oh, I'd love him to know. I'd love him to know you, Lord. I'd love him to have this space. But I respect him so deeply. How do I do this? So I sort of sensed that God was saying, do something about this. So I said, let's have a coffee. And I sat down and I said, Alejandro, you know that I really value our friendship, and you know that I really respect you, which I did. And I still do, but I did then, not because I just wanted to tell you that for me, Christian faith is such a gift. I would love you to have it. I love you the way you are, but I would just love you to have it. And do you know what he said? He said, Maeve, if you had never said that to me, I would have doubted your faith or our friendship. You know, I don't know if that's going to be helpful for any of your encounters, but just in case, questions and challenges emerge, and we need to hold our space and hold the questions and navigate that authentically between certitude and certainty. Seeking a way forward. Ireland, my young niece said to me the other day, Ireland, the young people of Ireland used to be really certain against the church. And now, she said to me, we realise we don't really have answers. And they're systematic about some stuff, but they're doubting, they're questioning. This is the reality that we live with. And I think one of the keys is, I love this quote of Rilke, is actually holding the questions. Because, and you as educators know this better than I do, where do people learn? At the edge of their knowledge, right? Like, when's the next step? Best keys of adult learning or growth is find the question and pull the threads. If you find a space where they're asking a question, that's where they learn. So let's love the questions. Let's not be scared of the questions. And by love the questions, it isn't take them as stones to throw them at. There are questions and this isn't an answer. No, love the questions. Hold the questions, embrace the questions. Because questions are the key to further. And the beautiful thing about holding questions, and by questions I mean the deep ones, also the doubts. Some of us were brought up, and I probably just missed this generation, but I think it's still there, we're brought up with the idea that faith was certainty, and therefore you didn't question. So when you questioned, you lost faith. My father was brought up like that, and he suffered a lot because of that. He was Mum had really deep faith. Dad struggled more. And that struggle weighed on him, not so much even the questions, but the fact that he questioned felt like a lack of faith. But that's not true. That's not true. The questions around faith aren't ones that sit at the edge of the church. They cut right through inside us. We are believers, and because we believe, we also question. And we also doubt, and it's the doubt that pulls me forward, and it's the experience of God that pulls me forward when I question. That, I think, is what Pope Francis is trying to say when he talks about that beautiful, and he repeats it, have you noticed? Time is greater than space. It seems philosophical, and in a sense it is, but one of the things it's telling us is time enables us to work slowly but surely, without being obsessed by immediate results, to accept the tension between fullness and limitation, initiating processes rather than possessing spaces. And I think it's one of the reasons why he doesn't mind the messiness of the middle space when we're asking the questions and before we have the answers. Because we haven't worked it out. We are a historical faith, a historical religion. We journey, doctrine develops. That's not new. It scares us a bit, but that's not new. So we journey in that space, and we journey based on our questions. And this is true of the best thinkers that we've ever had. And I thought I'd give you just two examples. One I'm going to say here very quickly. The other one perhaps in our masterclass, just to link what I'm doing between one and the other. Ranner, for example, Karl Ranner, I'm sure you've heard of him, was one of our great thinkers. He was one of the first ones who seriously said, but what happens to those in our family and our friends that we love who don't believe in Christ? What happens? When we were still in that space where we thought, oh my gosh, you're not in the church and therefore you won't be saved. And he asked that question. And he asked it solidly, and he asked it consistently, and he pulled the threads of a theology that found its way into Gaudium et Spes 22. And it's now our basic sensus fidelium, common sense. We know that God's grace is offered to all humanity in a way only to God known, in the depth of their lives and their beings. That came from a man who held a question. Not only, and the Spirit works, and there were others, but a lot of it was that person who held a question. So what are the questions that we hold that bridge us into our lives? And here I just thought, this is the first song that I ever wrote. And somehow, funnily enough, it's a very simple song, but it's still one of the favorites as I move through the world. I thought I'd just give you a little sample.
In my mind's eye, I can see a dream come true. In my life, what I want to do. Don't you sometimes feel that you dream your life away, living for tomorrow, but you lose today?
The questions we have, the questions we hold. And just before we move into the next section, those questions and the fact of certitude and certainty is a very intrinsic part of what we call a theology of faith. And I'm sure there are some people who study theology, but I love this. It's very simple. When theologians try to get their heads around faith, over history they've divided it into these three, if you want, aspects. To believe God, fidesque they call it. So the content, to believe what God says to me, the truths of faith that I embrace, which are not just ideas, which are realities, but also to believe in God, the trust. So fides qua, they call it, is my process of trusting. That's part of faith. So it's no good my giving them ideas if I can't help people into that space. And then there's the living out of it, the credere in, the believing into, the moving into the lifestyle, the loving, the doing that emerges from that. And they're all part, and the entrance point might be one or the other, but they're all part of it. And therefore, so is my growing. So is my growing. This is simply a poem that helps me as minister, teacher, theologian. I hope it would help you as educators. It's Denise Levertov is a beautiful American, I think she died recently, Catholic poet, and she has this gorgeous way of describing how it is not our answers that make us. I might just read it. Just when you seem to yourself nothing but a flimsy web of questions, you are given the questions of others to hold in the emptiness of your hands. Songbird eggs. that can still hatch if you keep them warm. Butterflies opening and closing themselves in your cupped palms, trusting you not to injure their scintillant fur, their dust. You are given the questions of others as if they were answers to all you ask. Yes, perhaps this gift is your answer. And that vulnerability and that space and that not knowing, which is also a knowing, because you only know you don't know when you know a little, leads me to the other part of what I wanted to say: beauty, the arts, music, in human life and Christian faith, and their importance for the lives and the leaderships of those you help educate. Now, as educators, there's one part of this that you know. I did enjoy when I moved into the Australian world, being aware that you had already delved into and are delving into the different patterns of knowing that we have, whether they be kinesthetic, whether they be symbolic, whether they be theoretical, and we have different spaces, and not every culture in the world is in touch with that. So that's a grace or a blessing or a plus that you have, and you have to lead us as well. And within those patterns of understanding, we know that music has been the unwritten creed of those who don't have faith. You know, we may not believe, but often it's a space where spirituality emerges in a way that it doesn't in words. Why is that? Why is that? And maybe it just makes sense and it can fit into the common sense mode of things, but I think it's helpful also, it definitely is for theologians to understand why. And one of the reasons is simply because it works differently. It works differently. One thing is that I say to someone, a young person, and I may need to at some stage say, you are made in the image and likeness of a beautiful God, and therefore you're beautiful. Or,
beautiful, beautiful, you are. I do like that wouldn't work. Beautiful, beautiful, you are. Beautiful, you are.
it's not a cut. just I'm trying to open spaces. Yeah, it works differently. It works differently. One way of understanding it is this. Now, and this is a very simple, and those of you who work in communication studies will know, but it does have a grain of truth. Communication studies, more or less, and this is what I'm doing. I was invited to prepare a keynote. I came with a keynote, and I am trying to communicate it to you. Okay? So if you understand it, mission accomplished. You can even understand and reject, still mission accomplished. That's your freedom. But if it got through, if I get it through, it's what the words do, right? Music does it differently. Music does it differently. This is from Jean-Jacques Nathier, who is a Canadian musicologist. And the important part of this are the arrows. So he talks about the making of music, the receiving of music, the traces the music, it's his language, it's the musical piece and or performance. So when I pick up a guitar and shift over here, the space changes, right? I'm not telling you something, I'm opening a space in which we both share. And we are listening to, and I don't own the song. I mean, I've written it, but I don't own it. It is in the space in between. It's yours and mine, and it's whatever you take from it. So it's actually quite a free space. It's actually quite a free space because we share in it. So think about the consequences of that for example, a God that we say is Trinitarian and relational. If we open spaces in which we can share and think about things on both sides.
Music has a tremendous power, as do other arts, but interpretism has a tremendous space to do that. It's a potential. And I think for young people, it's a non-threatening shared space, also because another aspect of music is that it's embodied. Even the most classical. Watch any orchestra tune. They can't do move. Music, it's time related, it's body related, it's incarnated. You can't leave your body outside the door and make music, it doesn't work. So it's an appropriate symbolic form for an incarnated faith, such as ours. And it is deeply free. It is deeply free. And that's one of the things I wanted to say. I noticed you had a workshop on art. Art is free. Have you ever thought about it? Like, some things are absolutely necessary. I had to have my coffee. Sorry, that's not absolutely necessary, but some things are necessary. We need to eat. Water, we need to drink. Art we would say is superfluous. But maybe it's not so superfluous because it's free. The beginnings of humanity are marked with carvings on rocks. Because as soon as we knew freedom, we knew creativity, and we started to create. Art is free. So it says something about a God that is free. And this is where beauty comes into the equation, okay? Beauty, my area of theology, and one that I think, again, only emerged in the 20th century, was brought back into theological thought by a theologian called Hans Urs von Balthasar. And one of the 20th century's great thinkers, again, like the saints, this morning's prayer, don't like everything he wrote, but in this, he got it right. He basically identified the fact that in the history of Western culture, we continued for centuries to identify God as true and formulate doctrines that are true. We continued to recognize that God is good and love and formulate ethical behavior and morals. But we forgot that God is beautiful. The arts and the church separated. We forgot that we need to be drawn into and attracted into God, and that God is beauty. We can ask what kind of beauty, but that God is beauty. Because without that, we don't want to believe and to live often. Or it can be tough going, and in any case, it's not meant to be separated. It's part of the whole truth of our God. In a world without beauty, in a world which is perhaps not wholly without beauty, but which can no longer see it. Have you ever lived in an ugly city? Oscar Wilde has a quip, as only Oscar Wilde can. And I won't say what city he was in, but he said, I'm surprised the criminals of the city don't blame the ugliness of the city as attenuating for their crimes. The fact is, without beauty, when everything is ugly, when there's no green, it is harder to breathe and to want and to live and to love. Now, the question needs to be asked, what kind of beauty? Dostoevsky was right. And we believe in a beauty that is crucified. We believe in a beauty, which is why I have this image the whole time. I find it beautiful, but it is a crucified Christ. It is a God on the cross, which the first Christians would never have worn around their necks or have shown because it was too cruel and too ugly. But we do understand, and there's something about it that draws us, and we know that there are depths there of love and of sacrifice and of self-giving, and that beauty is more than the veneer, and that beauty is about a life that also sacrifices, and that's the Eucharist, and that's where we draw from. From whence the creative leaders of the future, perhaps also through that doorway of beauty, and of teaching them about beauty, and what Christian beauty feels and looks like, and where we can find beauty outside of the realms of where it's taught to us. Balthasar described that beauty as glory. As glory. And I have one more. Am I okay for time? How are we? Okay. With that thought of beauty as glory, I'm going to finish up with something about Revelation and about art, but let's just hold that for a second. I invite you. Here we are. Where's it gone? There. This, I understand, is the kind of beauty that God is. glory to Him.
So just one last point when we're talking about beauty and the power of understanding God as beauty. And I'm going to link it with how art works. One of the best definitions of revelation, how God reveals, how God speaks to us, that I think there is in the history of Catholic theology, is that of interruption. Mm-hmm. I think it was Metz, the first one. Liebenberg picks it up and does a whole development of it. But revelation is interrupting. And it does interrupt. I mean, he interrupted Mary's life. He's always interrupted the prophets' lives. He's interrupted our lives. Was your life interrupted? I know mine was. He interrupts our lives. And good art, music, and by good, take that in inverted commas, because that would be a whole other talk. What's good? You know, let's be careful how we define good. Let's be careful how we define taste. But when it works, let's call it like that. When it works, art interrupts us. It stops us when we see something beautiful, and nature as well. When we see something beautiful or something well made, it stops us. It kind of interrupts your day, like a sunrise or a sunset will, or like when we do go to a good art gallery and there's something that you think, that's magnificent. You stop, right? You look at it, it's magnificent, it's beautiful. What's it doing? It's interrupting me. It's like an annunciation. And it's not only stopping my day, it's asking me about me, nearly. You know, it rejiggles how you feel about yourself, and you kind of think, what's important, what isn't, who am I? Who managed to do that? I'd love to do that. I was doing a retreat last week, and near where there was some surfers, and when it's well done, they mesmerize me. It's just so beautiful, right? It's skill, it's beauty, it stops you and you kind of think, oh, I'd love, what's it doing? It's provoking in you a desire, holy envy. That's what the saints are. I used to look at St. Teresa of Calcutta and her wrinkles in her wrinkles, because that's what she had, wrinkles, and think, I'm just jealous, because where are you so joyful when I'm, so it draws you. It's holy envy. It interrupts your life. The shorthand image is that of the Annunciation, a terrible beauty or gravity, breaking into the small house of our cautionary being, our protected space, which we all have inside. So much so that the house is no longer habitable in quite the same way. It changes you, it transforms you. So if we can manage to create spaces, and there opens the themes of the masterclass, to create spaces like that, and wouldn't it be beautiful if we looked at our creative kids and think, okay, let's nurture this genius so that all this giftedness breaks into spaces for the future generations. Because we, it's not just nice to have artists. I was nearly going to be Irish. We need them. We really, really need them. We need people who can open spaces that allow us taste a different kind of presence and beauty and experience. Because back to what I was saying about interiority, all the words in the world won't work if that doesn't happen, in one way or the other. We need it. So I thought I'd just finish with another song, which kind of gathers a little bit what I wanted to say, if that's all right. This is a song that, it's a more recent one, I will say. It's a song, and for me it does speak a little bit about leadership and beauty and music, and I will explain where it came from. I will explain where it came from, and it's called Strange Life. I wrote it after the death of a theologian who marked me a lot. His name was Michael Paul Gallagher. He was a theologian who, when I was speaking about culture, he wrote a lot about culture. Some of you, Clashing Symbols is one of his best books. He was an Irish Jesuit who taught at the Gregorian in Rome when I was there. And one of his best gifts was precisely the one, and he didn't talk much about questions, except in one point, he would never let us do any piece of work until we had found our question. So you could come to him with a great theme, and he would go, nice theme. What's your question? What is it? And where he went with that was, what is it that you really need to find out? Now, he would do that just with kind of every day papers or whatever, he would do that, but he would also especially work towards it with licenses and thesis, so you really had to have a question, and he knew that we would only do solid work if it was something we really needed to know about. So that was the one thing he gave me. He also gave me, he was sort of an accidental theologian, in a sense. He taught English literature for a few years in UCD, which is a big state university in Dublin, for years, and then kind of landed in theology. And he always said that he was never really your typical theologian. And in a place like Rome, that can feel it can make you feel a little bit less, because they've studied the fathers, and they have years and years of publishing and themes of theology that are, I don't know, whatever. And yet this man who thought through literature into theology and wrote about atheism and faith ended up being working in the Pontifical Council for Culture, being head of fundamental theology, being the dean of theology at the Gregorian University. Why? Because he was so faithful to his own thought processes. And one of the gifts that he gave me was always bringing me back to who I was as a theologian, and who I was as a missionary, and who I was as a musician. I can still remember the time I was walking down at the Gregorian with him, and I say it because for me it's one of the examples of teaching that has most marked me and that I'm most grateful for. I had just done the license on the Word and Beauty, and I gave him a CD just for him to hear it and to see what he thought. And he listened to it, and he came back and he said, and he was a little bit of a poet, he said, it's really good. I really liked it. He said, you never write about your music. Why is that? Your music doesn't appear much in your theology. Why is that? That was all he said. And that was the first year of my doctorate on music and theology. Because someone at the Greg, where they didn't study music at all, and where they spoke about interdisciplinary, and now they do it more, but Roman culture has a different take, and lots of lovely people, but that was new, because he knew how to open that door, and he kept me there, not forcing, but he kept bringing me back to why I was doing it, to what kind of theologian I was, and to what I was bringing to that space. It seems to me that all of our educating is about that. It's about, yes, we receive, and I go back to the beginning, we receive from the past into the present and through to the future, but the mediator is me, that person with the insight or the question that I was talking about. It's me. It comes through me. And that is deeply theological. It's deeply incarnational. We believe in a God who was one man. It was Jesus, like one time, one context, one culture, and that's our universal truth. And so we're interpreting for centuries into the future, because we're not Jews and times change, and yet he's the truth. Am I making sense? So it comes through us. My Irish accent, my music, good, bad, indifferent, but my sensibility, your sensibility, and we all feel that that's limited. It is limited, it's particular, it's beautiful. And that's why we need one another, but I need to hold that space. And we need to be faithful to that space, which are my questions, my insights, my difficulties, which is actually what makes our teaching dense, like have something, not just words, but actually you touch life there, because there's actual life at play and at stake there. So this song called Strange Life speaks to that.
It's a strange life. Are you alright? Sorry, maybe hard to say till you try goodbye. universe can do the things that you might do. One night, combat, extra time, heartbeat, hold me in. Close your eyes. You can see what's true best when it's strong. Searching inside. You are the few know what they want. Life is way too real to not imagine how it's meant to be. Life is way too short to waste on anything except your dreams. Strange like we try, walking inside. Beauty, help me feel. Take your time. Gotta slow things down to get them right. Come yourself. Ain't no one but you can work that out. It's a strange life. Are we alright? Sorry, maybe hard to say till you try goodbye. It's a strange, it's a strange life. It's a strange